So, big update on my video from yesterday on the Israeli attacks over the weekend on, like 5 different factions across, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Israel essentially went and bombed a bunch of folks who Israel perceived to be enemies, namely because they were Shiite Muslims, and accused them of essentially plotting to invade Israel at some point in the near future with the help of Iran. And so now that the dust is starting to settle and these countries were able to get their statements together, we're starting to hear what their response is to these Israeli attacks. Now, Syria really hasn't acknowledged them at all because, first of all, there's a lot of problems in Syria right now. They don't really have time to worry about Israel. And 2, Israel bombed Syria so much that it's really not even worth for the Assad government to acknowledge it anymore. It just happens, and they're not really in a position to do much about it at this point. So Assad has pretty much shrugged it off. But the other 2 countries, Lebanon and Iraq, they're not as accustomed to being bombed by Israel on a regular basis. Particularly Iraq, which has never really had much interaction with Israel. Iraq is separated by Israel by a couple countries. They've got Jordan and Syria in between them, so there really isn't a whole lot of direct military conflict between Iraq and Israel, in the history since World War II. So the Iraqis are quite miffed that Israel would fly all the way over there and bomb their country, people in their country. Particularly the Shiite militias, since even though the Shiite militias are not official government forces, the Shiite militias do have representation in parliament, and Shiites, of course, make up a majority of the Iraqi population. So even if not everyone is a Shiite militiaman, pretty much the folks in charge in Iraq running the show are the Shiites, and so they are the ones in power right now, and they're quite upset that their people were bombed by the Israelis. The Iraqis have gone so far as to call Israel's actions a declaration of war, and have said that they are going to defend their country and their population by any means necessary, and that the sovereignty of Iraq is a red line for them. Now, this is a bit of an empty threat, considering that, Iraq, like I said, is pretty far away from Israel, and they don't have much of an air force, thanks to, their close relationship with the United States. The U.S. has never really seen much reason to let Iraq have an air force, and also Iraq doesn't really want to spend the money when they have the U.S. Air Force patrolling their skies. But you can't exactly expect the U.S. Air Force to shoot down Israeli planes, considering that Israel is a closer ally of the U.S. than Iraq is. So I guess when it comes down to that, the U.S. is going to let Israel do what it wants to Iraq. Now, the U.S. has completely disavowed what the Israelis have done, or I should say they disavowed involvement. They didn't necessarily say, hey, Israel, you effed up here, although they did say that the Israelis did it, so they're kind of throwing them under the bus. But it's still pretty clear that the Americans are not willing to stop the Israelis. They're not going to shoot down Israeli planes to protect Iraq. And so Iraq is trying to make a bit of threats of their own, but I don't really think much can come of it. It's not like the Iraqis can go over and start bombing Israel in retaliation, and the Iraqis probably won't be able to shoot down Israeli planes. As I mentioned before, what kind of planes does Israel fly? Well, they fly F-16s and F-35s, the same planes as the United States. So it's a little risky for the Iraqis to go around firing anti-aircraft munitions at F-16s and F-35s when those very well may be American planes misidentified as Israeli. Now, Iraq was not the only country, Iraq and Syria, they're not the only countries that Israel attacked this past weekend. They also attacked Lebanon. They bombed 2 sites in Lebanon, namely a Palestinian training camp in northern Lebanon, very far away from the Israeli border, and almost to Syria, actually. And they bombed a Hezbollah office in Beirut. Now, Hezbollah, as you'd imagine, is furious about this. Hezbollah and Israel went to war in 2006 for about a month, I believe. independent of the Lebanese state, Hezbollah has a big paramilitary force that is pretty much rivals the Lebanese army. And they were able to fight the Israelis on their own in their own war. And the Hezbollah is saying that these drone strikes by Israel, which, by the way, were like suicide drone strikes, the drones, all these attacks have flown into their target and then exploded. They say that this has opened up a new phase in the long-going conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. And so we may see in the coming days a response by Hezbollah because Israel hit them personally in this case. Now, Israel's not admitting to this, but it's pretty much confirmed at this point that Israel did blow up that Hezbollah office. But Hezbollah is not alone in their condemnation of Israel. Also, the president of Lebanon, who is not a Shiite Muslim, unlike Hezbollah, he is I believe, a Maronite Christian, which is one of the major factions in Lebanon. I'm not going to get into the politics of Lebanon, but the president, he's a Christian, he's not a Shiite, but he's very upset that the Israelis are bombing his country. And he came out very strongly and called it a declaration of war and said the Israelis have absolutely no right to bomb anyone in Lebanon. It is noteworthy that the president of Lebanon, I believe, was a general in the Lebanese Civil War, so he's not exactly an empty warmonger just spouting off tough talk. He can back it up. He's been at war a lot in his life. And unlike Iraq, Lebanon is quite close to Israel. So if you have the president of Lebanon and the leader of Hezbollah both furious with Israel and saying that Israel has started a war with them, well, then you could expect that there's going to be some kind of a retaliation carried out by both Hezbollah and the Lebanese military. Now, the prime minister of Lebanon, who I can't remember if he's Shia or Sunni, but he is one of the two Muslim sects. He's sounding a bit more cautious than the leader of Hezbollah and the president of Lebanon. He is urging that there be some intervention by diplomats trying to work things out between their two countries, and that there could be a very dangerous escalation in the future. I think they're kind of playing good cop, bad cop here, to where the president's talking really tough, and the president, I believe, is the one in charge of the military in Lebanon. And he's saying, like, hey, Israel declared war on us, we have to defend ourselves, and then the prime minister is kind of playing the good cop and saying, hey, let's try and talk this out amongst as neighbors. But this tough talk from Hezbollah, the president of Lebanon, and the Iraqi government seems to have been getting through to Netanyahu, because Netanyahu came out and he seemed quite flustered, urging the international community to protect Israel, because Israel is under imminent threat of being attacked by these terrible Shiites. I believe he specifically named Iran, who, interestingly enough, I've not seen respond to these Israeli attacks over the weekend. Remember, Israel's justification for bombing all these sites is that these folks are friends of Iran and that they're going to help Iran invade Israel at some point in the future. We're not exactly sure when. I think they said something about this week. There was something going to happen, but who knows if any of that is true. Honestly, I'm surprised this isn't a bigger story than it is. I mean, this seems like a pretty dangerous time for the Middle East, and one of the most flammable situations that the Israelis have put themselves in my lifetime. It seems quite likely to me that after Bibi went and kicked, like 5 different hornets' nests, that one of them may come out and try to sting him. I'm not exactly sure what Bibi's angle on this is. I don't know if he was trying to just provoke attacks from his enemies so that he could then play the victim and get some international help and lead some kind of major war that would help him get reelected, but it seems like a very dangerous game to me. Even if the Americans and whoever else decide to step up to the plate to defend Israel against the enemies that they've just made, although they were kind of already enemies, but the war that Israel is trying to get themselves into, I don't see how that's a win for Netanyahu, because then you just have an unnecessary war. And I would think that the Israeli people might see through that that war would, if it happens, would entirely be Netanyahu's fault, because he just went and bombed these places out of nowhere. But perhaps they're more susceptible to propaganda than I might think. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.